Right, so an Austin Healey Sprite with a Mini Cooper S engine in it. Unfortunately, you put oil in it and it finds the nearest exit. So the plan today, bonnet off, intake and exhaust manifold out, radiator, all that jazz. Because we need to pull the engine out and we think that it's going to be the oil pump gasket. Because as it's warming up, it's just blowing all the oil past that and leaking it straight into the bell housing and onto the floor, which has actually turned out to be rather expensive in terms of oil consumption. So first things first, bolts on the bonnet. Don't smack your head on that because that hurts. And yeah, I'm going to do that now, and then we'll get to the interesting bit. Bonnet off, metric tools, Imperial car. Probably going to try to ignore that. So what we've got going on here, twin HS6s on a Mini Cooper S 11 stud head engine with straight cut gears at the back there. This car does have a name or two, Agent Orange or Tango, depending on who you speak to. Could be a reason for that. So my next job here, these bolts up here, these brass bolts, they hold both the intake and exhaust manifold on. Just a quick note here, and an interesting design feature. When these carbs leak fuel, which they inevitably will do, they leak fuel right onto a hot exhaust manifold, which does seem quite fiery to me. So I'm going to crack on with that. Fasteners loosened to the point that the intake manifold will actually come out now, but there is the throttle cable. I conveniently broke the choke cable last time I was playing with this, so I don't need to do that, but there is the breather pipe that goes down to the sump to disconnect, and the fuel line going into the carb here. We have had a slight coolant leak on the immaculate workshop floor, so I'm going to disconnect those, and then intake and exhaust manifold will be off the car. Everything is disconnected, so intake off. That is a lot of carburetor for a little engine. Into your nest you go. So undo the rest of those and the exhaust manifold comes off. This one, stud's actually coming out with it. Actually no, it's not doing. Interesting. Anyway, that's off next. Then it will be on to the radiator and the cooling system. Quick shout out to split pins. You don't see them much on modern cars, and I suspect that's because every time you take one off, you launch it halfway into orbit. Radiator out. Small quantity of car juice has ended up on the floor. Oil cooler pipes off the engine. So the next jobs will be engine mounts either side, and to begin disconnecting the gearbox from the engine, which will involve going underneath the car in the mess that I've just made. So, engine mounts disconnected from the body, bell housing bolts off, jack on the gearbox to give it enough angle as the engine's being pulled out of the car. So strap it up, engine out. relatively painless. So next is pressure plate, centre plate will fall out, flywheel off, then the engine plate. Pressure plate and clutch off, oily flywheel which is missing teeth unfortunately, so that's no longer balanced correctly. That's due to the starter motor staying engaged on 1 or 2 occasions, so that's ruined the ring gear. So next is breaker bar, lock out the flywheel there, bend back those 6 tabs, bolts off, flywheel off. Flywheel off. This is a aftermarket rear main seal kit for these engines. And to get this off, there's 2 Allen keys either side here, then that splits, then it's engine plate off, and then we can see what's leaking oil. Aftermarket rear main seal kit off, complete with blue gunk. Engine plate off next. Engine plate and oil pump cover both off, so you can see this gasket here, which is what we suspect has failed, but there isn't actually a clear indication anywhere of split or damage. What we do think though is that the gasket and the oil pump cover weren't seated correctly, so there's a possibility there as to why it's been leaking oil everywhere. Whilst we're here though, we've got the borescope in the oil pump drain just to check that it's clear down to the sump, which it is. That's the sump there. So replace those 2 components. Flywheel is going to go for a new ring gear because this engine seems to have had quite a bit of money spent on it, and we don't want it unbalanced. So everything back on, and we won't find out if we fixed it until it's back in the car and running.